Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Core Studio. Welcome to the show. Alright, so on today's episode, I'm going to be breaking down the most push cards from the entire year. We've had a very long year with a lot of cards in it, and some of those cards, well, are just a teensy bit push, so let's jump into those. Now, the first card I'm going to bring up is one of the big enchantments of the year and pretty early on in the year, and that is Annie Joins Up. And I think this kind of illustrates just where we're at this year and how last year, my goodness, there was one card in particular that is somewhat like this, but this is not quite to that level. So many things were pushed this year, but I think overall the feeling of pushness is just a little bit less than last year, and maybe that's just us getting used to it, though, I guess. Regardless, Annie Joins Up, a very powerful card, a legendary enchantment for 4 mana in Naya. As it enters the battlefield, deals 5 damage to our creature, planeswalker, and opponent controls. Even if it didn't have that, it would still see probably the exact same amount of play. A triggered ability of a legendary creature control triggers. That ability triggers at additional time. So basically, this is kind of like removal. I mean, it's usually good enough to get rid of a medium-sized to small creature, obviously, or a planeswalker, usually, most of the time. That being said, what does matter here is doubling up triggered abilities of legendary creatures. And here's the thing about Commander. Well, the entire format is basically built around legendary creatures. So if you have a legendary creature in your command zone that has a amazing triggered ability, and you're like, yeah, the entire deck is built around that triggered ability. What's better than that once? Twice. Every single time that happens. So, yeah, if you've got a commander that has a triggered ability and you build around that at all, which many commanders are going to be doing that, and it's in Naya, you probably are hard-pressed to not include this card, especially when it's also like a somewhat, reliable-ish removal spell, too. So, yeah, this card versus, Roaming Throne from last year, not quite the exact same. Roaming Throne can fit in any deck out there, which is insane. It also helps out, like, any kind of tribal synergies, too. That being said, this one, if you have a Naya commander, this is a push card in that it's just like, yeah, you probably should be including this in your deck if your commander has a triggered ability. Pretty crazy. Next up, I guess I should say really quick, too. Yeah, if you've got legendary tribal, nearly an auto-include as well, with it being legendary, too. Next up, Echoes of Eternity. Again, Wizards just can't help themselves when it comes to them being like, yeah, players, they like triggered abilities. Let's just give them all the things that double all those things up. Yay! Echoes of Eternity, a kindred enchantment Eldrazi for 6 mana in colorless. Big triggered ability of a colorless spell you control or another colorless permanent you control triggers. Triggers all the time. Cast a color spell, copy it, double it up, choose targets to the copy. This is one of those cards that's like, if it was in any other color, it would be like, hey, yeah, or I guess any other color, I should say more. So it was like, let's say it was a blue enchantment, all right? If it was a blue enchantment just applied to, like, all of your things, then it'd be like, oh, that's like an 8 to 10 mana card. Or, like, if it is 6, you get, like, one of those things, not both. And it would be more mana than 6 still. Because this is like, well, you're limited to colorless, it's still basically like an auto-include in colorless decks. This thing is push. It's doubling up not only triggers, but also all of your spells in a colorless deck. That is pretty crazy. Again, it is, yes, limited in that it is just for colorless decks, but still it is pushed within that requirement. And the last enchantment I'm going to bring up is more of a recent one that we got from Duskmourn, Unholy Annex / Ritual Chamber. This is a room that, well, when you first read it, like, oh, wait, that's the really, even just half of this is very good. The Unholy Annex part. The other part's nice, too, but, like, it works together. Here we go. So, Unholy Annex, 3 mana in black. Get of your end step, draw a card. If you control a demon, you won't lose 2 life, and you gain 2 life. Otherwise, you lose 2 life. This is basically a better Phyrexian Arena kind of already-ish. Like, yeah, there is a slight downside to it if you don't have a demon in play, right? Oh no, I lose 2 life. Yeah, okay, that's a decent amount for one card, right? Usually, like, the rule in Commander's like, yeah, oh yeah, 1 life for 1 card, not a big deal at all. Like, I'll do that any day of the week. 2 life, okay, we're getting up there a little bit, like, that's greed numbers. But, of course, we've got ways to mitigate that. But yes, the difference between this and, say, Phyrexian Arena is you get value out of this right away. Again, this is on the end step, not the upkeep. So you're not waiting an entire trip around the table to get your card. You get that at the end step, and it just keeps building on that. That being said, of course, Ritual Chamber, when you unlock this door, you get a 6/6 black demon creature with flying. They're just 5 mana in black. So yeah, again, obviously, if you just get the demon out with that side of it, congratulations, you're going to be draining your opponents as well and gaining life too. Obviously, it's a slam dunk in Demon Tribal, or if you have any kind of changelings that might help you as well with this. That being said, it's like better for Phyrexian Arena because you're probably willing to lose more life to get the cards quicker, usually, and also it does come with a, hey, make a 6/6 flyer for 5 mana that also helps you gain life too and drain your opponents. It's a very good, very solid, very pushed card. Next, we're going on to creatures, but this is an enchantment creature, so, yeah, it's both. That being said, this is in the creature section according to Moxfield. Here we go. A 4/3 Snake Glimmer, Enduring Tenacity, enchantment creature for 4 mana in black. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. When it dies, if it was a creature, return to the battlefield, under its control, it's an enchantment. This is just basically, and we'll see this for a couple of these, obviously I'll bring the other ones up too. This is, very solid, heavily used enchantment in Commander, but as a creature, but also then if it gets taken out, it becomes an enchantment. And this is just even better because, well, this is what, Sanguine Bond? Is that the card I believe, right? This is based off of. But essentially, again, it's like, hey, you gotta kill it twice. Like, your opponents have to take this out twice. It also, I believe, costs 1 less than Sanguine Bond itself. But yeah, a very solid card that's like, hey, you know what? Okay, we already have this one card that was pretty good, actually very good, even combo-centric in certain ways too. Let's make that, but a creature version that actually has to be dealt with and it becomes an enchantment too. So like you get 2 lives with it as well. Yeah, this is a very solid card. On top of it just being like a 4/3 that you're like, yeah, sure, I got an extra creature in play when I need it. Next up, Enduring Curiosity. Again, you're going to be seeing a pattern with some of these where I keep bringing these up. This one is a 4/3 Cat Glimmer enchantment creature, 4 mana in blue, flash. Whenever a creature control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. When it dies, if it's a creature, return to the battlefield. Under its control, it's an enchantment. This is basically what Coastal Piracy, essentially, but now on an enchantment creature that has flash, that again, if it's dealt with, you get it back again. Yeah, these, like, Glimmer kind of creatures are very solid because they are just, in a way, like, less hardy, but then more hardy than the actual regular versions of them. Plus, like, this one, again, just happens to have flash, too. So it's like, yeah, sure, flash this in your opponents are like, well, I don't need to block that little 1/1 or a couple of these 1/1s. I'll just take the 4 damage from your little 1/1s. You're like, oh, okay, flash it in, draw some cards. Versus they might have blocked. Maybe they thought you had a combat trick of some sorts. They didn't. They might have blocked, but they don't. If you had Coastal Pirates in play, they probably would have. And since you didn't, they're fine. Next up. Yeah, Enduring Vitality, perhaps the most pushed out of all these, a 3/3 Elk Glimmer with Vigilance for 3 mana in green. Creature control of tap, add 1 mana of any color. Cryptolith Right. When it dies again, it comes back into play as just an enchantment. So yeah, this is unlike the previous ones, which I talked about, with Enduring Tenacity. That one was actually 1 mana cheaper than Sanguine Bond. Enduring Curiosity, I believe, is the exact same price as Coastal Piracy. Enduring Vitality is, yes, 1 more mana than Cryptolith Right, but Cryptolith Right is undercosted. I will say that right now. This being 1 more mana is probably the amount of mana that Cryptolith Right should have cost itself. And also, yeah, this is, again, a hardier version, technically, of Cryptolith Right because you have to take it out twice. And being a 3/3 Vigilant creature first is quite nice as well. But yeah, Cryptolith Right, a very good card. Speaking of which, Warren Soul Trader, a 3/3 Zombie Goblin Wizard, 3 very relevant creature types for 3 mana in black. Pay 1 life, sacrifice another creature, create a treasure token. So yeah, being able to have a free sacrifice outlet, yes, with a slight requirement to it, right? It's not just straight up like Viserys here. But yeah, paying 1 life, again, we talked about life in Commander, not a big deal to just throw it around. Be like, oh yeah, I lose 20 life, sacrifice 20 creatures, make 20 treasures. Yeah, I win the game probably with that. At least you would hope so. There are certain combos you can pull off with this, obviously, too. I mean, if you've got like a Blood Artist in play or Azulport Cutthroat, or any of those types of creatures that, like, hey, if a creature dies, you drain an opponent or all opponents and you gain a life. You are mitigating that life loss, of course. And of course, there are certain ways to really take advantage of and use and abuse tokens when they come into play, when it comes into sacrificing tokens, etc., etc. And yeah, just basically generating mana with this is pretty absurd. This is basically like Phyrexian Altar in a way meets, yeah, I mean, like some Lotus Petal maker. I don't know. Anyways, basically a way to turn your Viserys into a Phyrexian Altar with a little bit of life loss, but you get to keep that mana around if you actually want to. So it's a very good thing. And again, like I mentioned earlier, very relevant in zombies, goblins, wizard, creature types right there. on top of this just being a very solid card overall, a free sacrifice outlet, slight requirement, obviously, but usually mitigating the decks that care about that, like, you know, Riskrat style, etc., etc. Speed of treasures, though, I have to bring up Crime Novelist. When it was like, oh wait, this is an uncommon somehow? Okay, Wizards, okay. A 1/3 Goblin Bard for 3 mana in red. Whenever you sacrifice an artifact, put a counter on Crime Novelist and add red. Here's the thing. Word that was not included in this is non-token. And that is not included in this and very relevant because we see what you're doing, Wizards. This is just, hey, you know your treasures? You get 2 mana now out of them instead of 1. Sure, yes, there are other ways to gain value off of this if you're sacrificing clues or blood tokens, etc., 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 other things as well. What really matters, though, of course, with this is, yeah, you're sacrificing treasures, you're doubling up on the value you're getting out of them. Yeah, you can't exactly pick the other mana that you're getting from them. Like, if you're like, well, I add a blue with my treasure, you also get a red. Who cares? You are doubling up your mana. It is very, very absurd with this kind of a card. Next up, Ocelot Pride, a 1/1 cat with first strike and lifelink for a single white mana. There's a reason why this one's $38. It has Ascend, and again, in Commander, basically, you know, you're always going to hit Ascend, and pretty quickly, most likely. It's just, that's the type of format. You go wide very quickly in Commander. It's not that hard to do, essentially. Beginning of your end step, if you gain life this turn, create a 1/1 white cat creature token. Then if you have the City's Blessing, for each token you have that ends the battle this turn, create a token's copy of it. This is low the ground in a relevant creature type, and yeah, if you have any kind of life gain synergies, or just, again, a way to pump this, maybe to make it get through in combat, way to protect it, it's got lifelink, it can gain you life, or if you just get it out on turn 1, you're probably going to get it through a couple of times to get those tokens going. And of course, once you hit that City's Blessing, you just double up your token generation from a 1/1 creature that comes down on turn 1 potentially. That's pretty crazy. Speaking of crazy, this is one that I always think back of to my childhood when I had the, I can't remember what the starter deck was called, but it was like an Ivy Elemental was the one on the cover of it, essentially, right? And it was, oh my gosh, Ivy Elemental. It's a rare. It's really cool. I thought it was the coolest thing ever when I was a kid. I was like, oh my gosh, you can put X mana into this creature, and it comes to play with X counters on it, and that's it. Back in the day, that was it. That was literally all it did. It's like, okay, it's a XX. I mean, it comes into play with that many counters. It's, yeah, I put in 6 mana. It's a 6/6. Yes, for 7 mana. And now these days, it's like, that's nowhere near good enough. Let's slap the kitchen sink on this thing. Everything on it. 0/0 Hydra for X and a green. So again, relevant creature type. Vigilance, Trample, Haste. Enters with X counters on it. And on top of that, when it dies, create a number of tapped treasure tokens equal to its power. So again, literally, the extra things on top of Ivy Elemental, which I think these days is an uncommon, I'm pretty sure, got demoted, sorry, Ivy Elemental, is Vigilance, Trample, and Haste, of course, which are all very relevant. It's like, okay, cool, I basically make a giant fireball that can swing at you and also can block, essentially, is what you are doing. Like, it's a fireball that comes out right away, but in green. But also on top of that, oh no, it'd be so much of a downside if I dumped all this mana into it and it died. So you know what? Hey, Wizards is like, you know what? Here, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it, okay? When this dies, you get treasure tokens. Oh wait, but we need to limit it. It's tapped treasure tokens. Okay, so I guess Wizards limited this somewhat in that way, but still, it's basically like a giant fireball that you, again, can swing with and block with right away. And also on top of that, it is a ritual effect for you too. So there you go. This is basically just like, yeah, you know what? Illustrating just how pushed things have gotten from these days, from when I started playing back in Odyssey Onslaught era. It's like, oh, things are slightly different now. Moving on to some pushed instance from the year, and I absolutely love the design of these spree cards. I mean, okay, yes, I understand everything is like kicker adjacent, sure, but still, I like the design of these. I think they're interesting, all right? Here we go, instant for a single red mana, but the little plus sign means they're spree, so you can choose 1 additional cost, +2 and a red, untap all creatures you control if it's your combat phase, initial combat phase after this phase. So again, at a base level, again, kind of like I talked about with those, you know, glimmers, essentially, the enduring things. With this, this is just basically, what is it? Relentless Assault, whatever the one is that costs 4 mana, like the standard, hey, you know what? You get an extra combat spell. That's basically what that is. At a base level, if you just want to play that, cool, you got it. That being said, you can spend extra 2 mana, creature control +1/+0 and gain first strike until end of turn, or an extra red mana, choose target opponent. Whenever a creature control deals combat damage to that player this turn, create tap treasure token. So this is, hey, extra combat if you want it, a little pump effect that can potentially protect your team in combat if you want it, again, out of nowhere too. And also, yeah, do you want like a giant ritual effect potentially? Yeah, that. You can choose 1, choose 2 through 3, whatever you need to choose. Again, it's like 2 mana for that giant ritual effect, or 4 mana for the extra combat, or, you know, a combination of both. And of course, with that extra combat, yeah, being able to just get a lot of extra mana out of it too is pretty crazy. So being able to just give you all this again on top of, at a base level, this just costing what normal extra combat spells cost at 4 is pretty crazy, and in my opinion, pretty push. Next up, though, Dawn's Truce. I was wondering when this was going to happen because, like, Heroic Intervention came out a long time ago these days. It doesn't seem like that long, but I think it was the first trip back to, I think it was 8th Revolt. Anyways, yeah, so being able to actually just spend 2 mana to protect your entire board, usually you don't have that option, essentially. Most, like, hey, all my things get indestructible or whatever, is at 3 mana. That's typically what we see other than Heroic Intervention. Finally, though, we get another one, Dawn's Truce. At instant for 2 mana in white. Gift a card. You and permanent you control gain hexproof until end of turn. The gift was promised. Permanent you control also gain indestructible until end of turn. So, I just think quite Heroic Intervention. It's actually potentially, it's better and worse in a way, right? At a base level, if you need to protect yourself, Heroic Intervention doesn't do that. It doesn't give you hexproof. This does. This does give you hexproof at a base level. That being said, if it's, say, a board wipe that isn't targeted, that's just like Wrath of God, yeah, you need the indestructibility, you have to gift the card. Here's the thing with gifting cards, and some players don't necessarily understand that as to why it's, like, not as bad to gift something. Well, like, the player that, like, is again, opposing you with this card, let's say, so the player that casts the Wrath, and, like, you don't want to benefit that player potentially, maybe they're in a good position, maybe they're like, yeah, I'm going to control the board, and you're like, oh no, I don't want you to destroy my stuff. You might not gift them the card. You might gift it to one of the other 2 players, essentially. You might just gift it to the player who's in the least threatening position, who actually needs to catch up a little bit. You can make deals with that. So, like, the gifting thing is a deal that you can make. So again, it's not all that big of a downside. Is it, like, would it be better without having to give up a card? Yeah, sure. But it's also not that big of a downside to have to do. And again, sometimes it can help you because you can politic with that and be like, hey, I know you're desperate right now. All right, I'm saving my board. You're about to get your board wiped because of that player over there that's doing this, not me, okay? I will give you a card. Help me out, all right? Give me, like, 3 turns off of you attacking me. I do say 3 because, like, your board's getting wiped. You've got no creatures. You might get some creatures out next turn after that. Give me some time off of you attacking me, and you get an extra card. And usually you can just make a simple deal like that, okay? So, again, being at... That's not why this card is pushed, though. Overall, again, being able to spend just 2 mana to protect your entire board, hexproof, indestructible. You don't ever see that. We're seeing it again with this one. It's very, very good. Moving on to Insatiable Avarice. This is a card that is another one of those spree cards, and it is quite good. Sorcery for a single black mana, but again, that plus sign with the spree. +2, search life for a card, then shuffle with that card on top. Additional 2 black. Target player draws 3 cards, loses 3 life. So again, this is basically like Sign in Blood meets Vampiric Tutor. Now, obviously, it's not as efficient as a Vampiric Tutor. Vampiric Tutor is absurd, and yeah, you'd rather spend the extra 2 life versus the 2 mana. Also, instant speed. Anyways, some slight differences, obviously. That being said, being able to be like, okay, I tutor for a card, get it on top, and also draw 2 other cards and lose 3 life. Yeah, for 6 mana, that's well worth it. Or again, in the circumstances where you're like, you know what, I can wait a little bit. I'll just spend the 3 mana and I'll go tutor for that card, get it on top, and get it next turn. Or maybe another way to draw that card off the top. Or again, in the circumstance where you're just like, I just need to draw some cards and I'm willing to pay the 3 mana and just draw 3, lose 3. Cool. Or again, like Sign in Blood could be a finisher for an opponent that's really low on life, and you're like, hey, draw 3, lose 3. You're like, well, I'm at 2 life, so no, I'm dead. And you're like, yes, you are. So again, this does a lot of things for you. It's very, very efficient, and yeah, we don't really see too many like draw 3 for 3 mana cards out there just at a base level. Sure, you lose 3 life, but who cares? That does not matter at all. On top of this being a very solid tutor, it's a great card. Next up, Blasphemous Edict. Yeah, when this one was basically teased by Morrow, it was pretty easy to guess kind of what this did. Sorcery for 5 mana in black. You may pay black rather than pay the spell's mana cost if there are 13 or more creatures on the battlefield. I think everyone kind of knew around what this was going to be when that teaser came out. Because like, that sounds a lot like it's going to be something like a Blasphemous Act. The fact that his name Blasphemous Edict is hilarious. Each player sacrifices 13 creatures of their choice. Here's the thing. If you are playing this, either you are completely fine with, losing all the creatures that you have, because, sure, you're not in a good spot, or maybe you've got ways to take advantage of that, like, an aristocrat-style deck where you're like, sacrificing creatures is a very good thing for me. Yay! Or maybe you have a token strategy where you're going so wide that you're like, well, I guess I can sacrifice 13 out of my 30 creatures. Sure! And your opponents are having no creatures in play again. So this is one where Is it as good as Blasphemous Act? It's close if it's not as good. I mean, like, here's the thing. Blasphemous Act takes out most creatures, right? 13 damage to all creatures is usually enough to take everything out. That being said, of course, there are certain circumstances where creatures will have more toughness than that somehow, and they do survive. Or if you, say, have, creatures that are indestructible or can regenerate, etc., this gets around those things. It doesn't get around an opponent having, again, 20-plus creatures. That's usually not the case, though. So, yeah, they're going to wipe out all their creatures. It is one that, again, it's a one-mana board wipe that is usually just, like, either one-sided because you build around it, or it is just like, oh, it's a one-mana board wipe and it gets around pesky things like indestructibility. Yeah, and typically you're going to be able to spend just 1 mana to do so. And even if you're spending 5 because there's like 10 creatures on the battlefield, it's still worth that. It is still well worth that. And again, like, it's kind of funny because, like, we have Barter and Blood, I think is the card that comes to mind. 4 mana, everyone sacrifices 2. Yeah, that's still a very good card. This one is, let's bump it up 1 more mana, and it's 13 each instead. And on top of that, you're going to spend 1 mana instead. So it's a very pushed, very solid card from this year. Finally, let's jump into some lands that I think are pushed from this year, and the first one that comes to mind from the lands is definitely 3 Tree City. Legendary land enters, choose a creature type, tap for a color, or you could do this, pay 2, tap, choose a color, add amount of mana of that color, equal to the number of creatures you control the chosen creature type. Basically, hey, you want Nykthos, Shrine of Nyx, but tribal? You got it. Yeah, this is an absurdly good card in tribal strategies, especially tribal strategies that want to go wide, which I would say a lot of them do. So if you got like 20 elves in play, congratulations. This land taps for, well, yes, 20 basically, but yeah, you got to spend the 2 plus you're tapping it, so you're kind of down 3. So you're netting like 17 mana off of it. Obviously, if you also have some ways to untap the land, things get even more out of control. Now, is it better than Nykthos? I mean, it's different kinds of decks that want them. Like, Nykthos is pretty much like, mostly, I'm not saying all the time, like monocolor decks are like, yeah, it's kind of hard to argue against utilizing that card if you have any ways to commit to the board, which you usually do. This is like, hey, do you have a tribal deck? Do you like to go wide? Yeah, this is a very good card for you. So there you go. It's a very solid, very powerful, some might even say push card. And finally, Urza's Cave. Urza lived in a cave once. I don't know. I don't know nothing about that storyline. Anyways, I like the basics. I don't know if Urza lived in a cave at some point. Anyways, land Urza's Cave. It's always funny when they're like, this land, we needs a name, and it also needs a type. And its type is the exact same as the name. Urza's Cave is an Urza's Cave. No, really. Taps for a colorless, pay 3, tap, sacrifice Sister's Life for a land card from the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. This is a land tutor that gets a land right into play, yes, tapped, but any land you want, and it's something that takes up no space in your deck because it's taking up a land slot, which is basically, again, like no space in your deck that is being taken up at all. So, yeah, this is, hey, go get whatever exact land that you need. If you have a deck that's built around a land or just has an incredibly powerful land in it, like, say, Gaia's Cradle or, yeah, 3 Tree City, yeah, cool, all right, just throw this in the deck. You're like, oh, I have it in play. Okay, early on, it's not hurting me except for not fixing my mana, obviously. That does hurt, yes, a little bit, but some decks, most decks, a lot of decks that are going to utilize it can get around that, essentially. If you're like a mono or 2-color deck, you probably don't care about that too much. Or colorless, you need that, essentially, anyways. That being said, yeah, you're like, oh, okay, cool, let me go tutor for the perfect land that I need, essentially. Like, oh, okay, cool, you're just on a land. So yeah, go get your best land out of your deck. Go get Gaia's Cradle. Even if you're just getting, like, say, Command Tower, it's like, okay, perfect mana fixing for me. Great, good for me. Or certain lands that have ETBs, etc., etc. This is just a very solid, very good land, and yeah, again, takes up no space in your deck. And with that, this episode is coming to a close. Comment below with your thoughts on it, and of course, as always, thanks again, and have a good one. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support.